Hello, everyone. I wanted to let you know that we're going to start at Cal Poly time at 2:10, just so you know. Cal Poly time. Good afternoon. Jeff Armstrong, President of Cal Poly. I'd like to welcome everyone here today, faculty, staff, students, and community members, to our Baker Forum, was created to honor President Warren Baker. There's many things that I would like to say to you. I think the most important thing I can say is that we care about each and every one of you. I especially care about our students of color that have been through so much pain. And I would also point you to a video that we released earlier today. Look forward to a great interaction with our panel members. And before I turn it over to Dr. Josie De Leon, our Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion, I want to end with a quote from Martin Luther King that I ended my video with. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. So please welcome Dr. De Leon.
Thank you, President Armstrong. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for choosing to be here today for this really important dialogue. I want to first of all thank President Armstrong for his commitment to change by supporting this opportunity to see ourselves through the discussion that we're going to have today. There has never been a more critical time for having the dialogue that we are having now. In many ways, it's a conversation that is long overdue. Cal Poly and all of us are committed to an actionable plan that will involve us beyond the event that we have today. I want to first of all thank the panelists whose perspectives are of utmost importance in creating awareness that will help guide appropriate action. And I would like to introduce the panelists. So if they could just stand as I call your name. First of all, Leilani Hemmings-Pillay, ethnic studies student. Jose Navarro, assistant professor, ethnic studies. Brian Hubain, assistant dean of students and director of the cross-cultural centers. Heidi Harmon, mayor, San Luis Obispo. Stan Yoshinobu, professor, mathematics. Patrick Lin, professor of philosophy. And I just want to add that these are really courageous voices that we will be listening to today. Without them, we would not have had this conversation. It's important for us to listen to their perspectives, to reflect on their perspectives, and hopefully learn something from what they have to tell us. Most of all, I want to thank this great lady to my left, Kimberly McLaughlin-Smith. She has been on our campus now for 2 days, yesterday and today, leading us in some very important soul-searching, reflecting, digging, talking, creating understanding, and most of all, listening. She comes to us from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, where her work is to guide her campus to create the kind of change that we're seeking. You see, none of us have it right. None of us have it perfect. We are all striving to get better. Cal Poly is striving to get better. And with all of our involvement, we'll get there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josie. Thank you so much for the invitation to come to Cal Poly and to share this time with you all. Very much happy to be here today and for the past couple of days. One of the most important things that I want to start out with is this collective on the stage and in this room and the people who are watching the live feed. I want to thank everyone for your time and your attention and your engagement. Movement forward is what my work is about at UNC Wilmington, and it is what my work will be about here at Cal Poly. One of the things that I know for sure, and I don't know much for sure because not many things in life are for sure, but one of the things I know about movements, especially as it relates to rights, civil rights, equity, and everything under that umbrella, is that none of it has ever happened with one population. Just like it doesn't fall apart through one population, pulling it back together and making it stronger does not happen by one population. We remember the civil rights movement. Some of us were born during that time, and I know the faces, and I know the races of the people who were involved in making that happen. So by no stretch of the imagination am I coming to this environment as a person of color thinking that we are the only ones who are going to be the foot soldiers in winning this back, winning back Cal Poly, making it stronger, making it better for each and every one who chooses to come here. See, that's the interesting thing. Students choose to come to universities. There's a freedom in this country that we enjoy that sometimes I think all of us kind of take for granted. You chose to be here. Your peers chose to be here. The people who work here chose to be here. And in choosing it, there had to be something that drew you all. So re-identifying that is one of the things that I hope we're able to do. My work here is not going to culminate today in this event. I will go back to North Carolina, but my work is just beginning. The collective work is just beginning. Preparing to come to Cal Poly, my city was all abuzz for a few reasons. I'll tell you why. Number one, I live in a city in North Carolina called Wilmington, North Carolina. It is a seaside city, so we live on the coast. It is the site, if you have spare time and you want to find out where I'm from and what it's like where I'm from, I can tell you it's very similar. The environment is very similar. The city makeup is very similar. And it is also the site of the only successful coup d'etat in this country. And what does that mean? That means that in 1898, the entire city government, the entire power structure, commerce, everything in Wilmington, North Carolina. You see, it had become a mecca for people from up north who were free and wanted to prosper. So the entire city was run by African Americans in 1898. And you can imagine what that might have been like for people who were not people of color in those times. And you can imagine what those times were like in those years as it relates to race. So I will tell you that on November 10th, in 1898 in Wilmington, North Carolina, there was a massacre of the people who were in power. And those seeds were planted in our city. And we all know what happens to seeds. They take root and they grow. And they take over wherever they are. And so inside our city, we have that kind of legacy as it relates to race. So we fight our own community battles quite a bit. So I'm in, unfortunately, very familiar territory. But with that said, I'm going back to my original words, forward movement. We do it every day in Wilmington. So what we've decided as a city, and what I hope we continue to do on our campus at UNC Wilmington, and what I hope you all are going to do, along with me and everyone who has their hands in this change, this movement of change, is we're not going to count the times that we fall down. Oh, we got to discuss it. We got to talk about it. We got to break it down. We got to dissect it. But we're not going to stay there. We're not going to count the times that we fall down. We're going to count the times we get up. So Cal Poly, one more time, it's time to get up. It's time to get up. I'm going to tell you what I told one of the reporters from our local NBC affiliate in Wilmington before I came here, because like I said, the city is all abuzz with my trip coming to this place and this space. The reporter asked me, why is this happening on college campuses? She didn't say, why is this happening at Cal Poly? She said, why is this happening on college campuses? These young people are too young. I come from an era where I understand it and I get it. And I know why we fought those battles. And I thought we would never revisit some of those times. And what I told her is what I'm going to tell you. You've got to be carefully taught. You see, none of us come into this world hating anybody, transgressing or planning to transgress and harm other people. We are brand new. We are so ready for the world. And we don't even know where we are until somebody informs us. You've got to be carefully taught. Let me tell you how insidious racism is, sexism is, all of the isms. Let me tell you how insidious those things are. They're in you before you can think for yourself. Again, they're seeds. They take root. And if you cultivate them, they will grow. But like anything that you are taught, you can unlearn it. That is a decision. Now, having those things placed inside of you, whether it's by media, your family of origin, your exposures, it's in there. I also said in that interview, there are families of origin, no matter the background really, but there are, and I think we know that there are, families of origin who hand down these notions to their young, like family jewels and land. It's legacy. So that's how it happens. And I know when these things happen on your campus or on my campus or on anyone's campus or in anyone's city, the last thing you want to talk about is what did they do, or how did they start thinking that way, or what makes them do this. You want to know what's going to happen. You want to know what we're going to do about it. But I will challenge the campus and the community to spend just a little bit of time helping each other unlearn what has been so incredibly instilled. So as I take a journey with this campus, I'm committing to Cal Poly for at the very least 6 months to walk this road and to help you develop a movement and to help you heal some of this pain. Pain, that's a word I want to touch on as well. I'm going to use myself as an example because I don't like to put anyone else on the spot. I'm going to use Kimberly as an example. When I've been hurt, this is my nature. My pain, I don't know if anyone else is in the room who's like me. My pain can manifest as anger. Anyone else like that? So when I'm hurting, sometimes you'll think I'm angry. And sometimes I'm both. But most of the time, the foundation may be anger. But what seeps up to the top and comes out of me is pain. So I dare say that this campus is in pain. There's a lot of pain. And it has fueled I'm going to go ahead and say some things to you all today. Is fueled by ignorance, is fueled by lack of exposure. It is so interesting to me because the era that my parents grew up in, they weren't exposed to each other as it relates to different races and different lifestyles and even different religions. You kind of stayed in the pocket. You stayed where you thought you belonged. So that is one of the culprits that I believe is at play here. We thought those times were done. They're not done. We still do it. We go to the road of least resistance. We go where we're comfortable. So what we end up with is a whole lot of people with no exposure outside their comfort zones. So I developed in the work that I do several years ago a phrase that I use consistently, constantly. And I'm going to share it with you. I've shared it on campus in a few sessions. So let me let you know what I think. Exposure to anything is everything, and the lack thereof is the same. Are you with me? Do you understand that? Exposure to anything is everything, and the lack thereof is the same. So if you're not exposed to people who just look like me, which quite frankly, let me let you in on a big secret that you may not know. What you see standing before you doesn't tell you anything about who I am. It's the least of who I am. This, I'm going to have to let go of one day. I'm just using this right now. I'm trying to use it well. But it's the least of who I am. All of my components of identity that you cannot see from the inside out should matter to you. Yours matter to me. What we do is we make these really quick decisions on sight. Oh yeah, well, keeping it moving, because that's not familiar to me. That doesn't look like anything I'm used to. That doesn't look like anything I have in common, anything in common with. So we constantly discard before we dissect. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I decided to make this work my life's mission. I'm going to die doing this. All right? I am. I am in a business that I want so desperately to be put out of. I want us to get it so that there is no need for a Kimberly. Not trying to take your job, Josie, but so there is no need for a Josie. We need to get this. I don't know that we will in my lifetime. I hope that we do. So today is the start of a movement. Today is the start of some unlearning. And one more thing that I'm going to impose into this conversation and this situation is a phrase that I like to use on my campus. There are people, you all, and we've heard it. People use that phrase, the race card. Even though we know this situation and this vibration that has taken over your campus is well beyond race. We know some other problems exist. But people use that phrase all the time, the race card. When people are hurting and when people are angry, and we know that we have that on this campus, we know that we have that. I know that I have it on mine. We don't think about grace. We don't think about how do we get each other engaged and involved. The only way we're going to do it is by hurting through it. The shortest distance between two people is a story. So I'm going to challenge people who never talk to do it, who never engage to do it. I want to use the grace card instead of the race card, instead of any other card. Once we allow our emotions to sit in the back seat, I'm not telling you not to put them in the car. Let them ride. But don't let them drive. Does that make sense? Yeah. Because emotions can be fuel and good fuel, and it can take you places if you let it, but you have to control it and not allow it to control you. I will tell you that I'm very proud of the students who came to the forum, to the mixer yesterday. And well into the mixer, I found out a lot of it was mandated. I thought I was fabulous enough for all y'all to show up. My bad. But what happened in that room was some constructive dialogue. That means I know you can do it. I knew you could do it anyway. So I'm inviting everyone else to the table. It's easy not to show up. It's easy to be pissed off and say, forget it. See, you thought you had me, didn't you? Yeah. That's the easy thing to do. But I'm inviting you to lean into this discomfort, lean into this anger, lean into this rage, lean into the change. A young man said in the forum yesterday to a young woman, I was working with them so that things wouldn't, I'm going to use young people's terminology, so that things wouldn't pop off. So I was managing a conversation. I was helping them and facilitating that. And he said, the young man said to the young woman that he was engaging with, that I'm sorry, I don't talk to people I don't know. Because she said to him, well, there are people who just walk past me in the skin I'm in, and they don't talk to me because they don't know me. Sometimes I don't feel welcome because people just look away. They can be looking right at me and walk right past me. And he said, well, he said, you can't blame them. You can't say it's because it's your race. I don't talk to people I don't know. Well, let's try that. I mean, let's try that. Another student I'm going to mention, and then we're going to move forward, because I don't want to be a talking head to you all. I want to hear your voices, and I want to hear these. A young woman came up to me after the student forum yesterday, and if you Google search all-American girl, that's what she looked like. Blonde hair and blue eyes, pretty girl, by the standards that we measure beauty in this country. And she said to me, tears, ready, locked and loaded right here. So I know the first word I'm going to say is over, because she's ready. She said, when people see me, I know they don't see an ally, but I want to be one. Tears running. She said, I look like what they think hates them, and I'm not one of them. I'm closer to being one of them, and they don't know it because I don't look like them. I'm fighting tears at this point, you all. Because we can do this, but we got to get out of our own way. We got to swallow some pride. We got to kick ego out of the car. Ego can't ride. Emotions can, but in the back. It's going to cost every single body, and it has already cost students of color, people of color in this environment quite a bit. I'm going to acknowledge that because that's a real thing. And just like I worked with the students yesterday, I said most of the time people just want you to acknowledge what they are dealing with. And if you start with an acknowledgement, you don't know where that will take you. You can't be just ready to say, that's not true. How would you know if you're not in the skin they're in? Just like, how would I know what the all-American girl who was talking to me goes through when she's wanting to be brave enough to walk up to somebody who doesn't look like her? So it's going to cost everybody up in here. It's going to cost everybody out there. But it's worth it. Because if we don't start taking this on, it's going to take us over. And that we cannot afford. So in closing, the invitation is extended to you all and to everyone that you know that you can reach out to who's not in this room today, for the people who are watching this remotely. As we begin to develop this road, this journey to October, I chose October, a 6-month span, because October 1st, 1901, Cal Poly was born. It's a rebirth. It's time. It's time. Tell the people that you know that we're about to start a journey and that we need them and we want them. Step outside your comfort zones and start engaging with your peers. Don't let fear drive you. Be afraid of what could happen if you don't do that. The way that this is going to work today is these numbers are here, and we want you all to pose questions for the panelists by texting. So there are limitations, and you can read them. So 160 characters for the first number at the top. And then if you email them, they're 250 characters. That is how we're going to generate your questions. We'd love to have you all come to the mic, but it's really hard to engage with paper and pen and this many people in a room like this. But please get busy on your phone. That's the one thing about this part of our lives in time. Most everyone has a cell phone or a device with them. So please begin to conjure those questions and pose those questions. Make those statements, because they're going to be fed to me through people backstage. And while we're waiting for you all to do that, I'm serious about that. That anonymity is also a tool by which you can get really brave and ask really good questions in anonymity. So do that, please. But as we wait for the questions to be generated, I'm going to engage our panelists, and they're going to give you a look inside where they are with what's going on. Are you all ready? Awesome. So each of you will have a very concise amount of time, be respectful of time and each other, to answer each of these questions. When the questions from the audience come in, I'm going to read them, and you will be able to choose which questions you answer to. Is that okay with you all? Okay. But this one I need everyone to spend just a moment on, the first 3 questions. Why is this subject matter important to you as a Mustang, as well as a human being? Why is this that we are going through and discussing important to you? We'll start with Leilani.
So for me,
You're good.
okay. For me, obviously I'm a Cal Poly student, and so the things that are happening on this campus and the ways that this campus is run affect my day-to-day life and will affect the duration of my 4 years here. And so I have that stake in that, but also that the identities that I have and the people that I interact with and the spaces that I occupy are all affected by these things, whether directly or indirectly. And so for me to not engage with these topics and work to unsettle the systems that are allowing bad things to happen would be to disservice myself and to disservice the people that I care about.
Okay. Thank you, Leilani. Jose.
So I'm a faculty member here on campus, and so I suppose that gives me a responsibility for teaching and learning. So that's a sort of baseline kind of interest there. But beyond that, personally, I'm invested in these issues because the question of racism not only affects students, but it affects faculty. If we learn anything from history, say the Brown versus Board case in 1954, or even the Mendes versus Westminster case, in 1947, which are, or Alvarez versus Lemon Grove. And these are the three central cases that desegregate public schools in California and the country. If we learn anything from those cases is that racism affects not only students, but faculty as well. And that racism at its core is about power, right? It's about using the superficial difference along race to concentrate power and then exploiting those who are different. And so what that teaches us, at least, is that you need to not only diversify the students for their own good, and for all the sort of good aims of diversity and learning from others, et cetera, but also diversify the faculty. So the one thing Brown didn't really attend to is that it diversified the student bodies of many of our schools, but didn't diversify the faculty. And the way in which schools and universities are run, the faculty have a say, they have power. And so that's one way to attend to the inequities that are produced by race and racism, is to give folks more power, power sharing. That's what real equity looks like, not just equality. And so that's what I'm invested in thinking about these ways to make a more equitable place to deal with the questions of racism than is to deal with the question of power, and asking some to give that up. And for some, that's painful. So that's where I am in terms of a university professor and my interest in this. I have these educational aims, these pedagogical interests, but I have these other personal interests as well. Now, to make this personal, when I came to Cal Poly, was in an English department. And the English department here at Cal Poly, in a good fall, if you're talking about tenure track faculty and lecturers, we'll have about 65 people to 70 people teaching for them in a fall. And of those 60 to 70 people, only 2 of us were faculty members of color. The curriculum was not diverse, the faculty is not diverse, so it becomes very difficult to speak up in those settings, to call people on their racism or sexism, et cetera, when you're one of 2. And so clearly you need more. This is about power sharing, this is about people at the table, and it became a difficult place to be. So that's my personal interest. So I have educational interest and personal interest in addressing these issues.
Thank you, Jose. Brian.
Hi, everyone. So I want to see true change happen. And really, this topic is important to me because, and this might really sound cheesy, but I do want to see world peace. No matter how cheesy that sounds, I think as human beings, we hurt each other very bad, especially when we don't know each other. We hurt each other really bad. And I want us to really get to that change where we change the way we treat each other, because that is really what makes a toxic environment. And when we talk about, this incident, that incident, I feel like we leave out a core reality, especially of people who are being marginalized. And that fact is that we experience microaggressions and racism, sexism, homophobia every single day. It wasn't just yesterday. It wasn't just a few weeks ago. It wasn't just even 2 years ago. This has been happening. So I really want to see some of that change, and it really gets me into the work that I'm doing, where I'm doing this work for people who look like me. I'm doing this work for people who are marginalized and treated differently, and there's no reason for that, no true reason. I want to unpack that with the people that I work with, and that's why I do that work, even as a practitioner, even as a researcher, even as an educator. That's why I do this work. And I think one of the most important things, and speaking in the here and now, is that I feel like we have let our students down. And that doesn't sit right with me. And I take responsibility for that, because in a lot of cases, I feel like I could speak up, but I chose to be silent. And I think right now I'm being reminded of why I got into this work, to really push through some of those barriers and to really create access for students of color specifically, but really all underrepresented students.
Thank you. Heidi.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to start by grounding us in the space that we're in right now and start with some gratitude and thanks for the Chumash peoples on whose land we now stand here on campus and in the community of San Luis Obispo. Because I think we all recognize that this isn't just about diversity, right? It's really about attempting to meaningfully address the whole historical and systemic injustice of white supremacy and colonialism. And I'm really grateful to be here today because I think we also recognize that this isn't just about the campus of Cal Poly. This is, of course, a national issue, and we certainly have our own issues in the city and the community of San Luis Obispo. And I'm grateful to be here because, of course, a lot of the students and the faculty and the staff are residents of the community of San Luis Obispo. And so I'm here because it's important to me that we work together to truly and meaningfully address this and partner to move forward in a constructive way. And I think lastly, I would just say I'm here today, and it's important to me because when parents of students of color that are considering coming to Cal Poly call my office and ask me, do I think it's safe for their students to come, that I really want to be part of making sure that that answer is yes.
Thank you. Stan.
So I want to echo many of the things that have been said by the other panelists already. This is by far the most important issue on our campus right now. And for me personally, this is not the world I want to live in. This is not the world or the campus that students deserve. We have major systemic campus climate problems, and that negatively impacts, so think about this, thousands of students, faculty, and staff daily. And it's a daily thing, and not just these big incidents, but it's a daily thing. And this is not okay. So that's why this is such an important issue to me.
Thank you. Patrick.
Hi, everybody. So, my name is Patrick Lynn. I'm a philosophy professor here at Cal Poly. I teach things like ethics, political philosophy, technology ethics, philosophy of law, which means that I'm naturally interested in questions about justice, equality, liberty, discrimination, privacy, and that sort of thing. I would say that I'm somewhere in between an idealist and a realist. And I think you need both for progress in a complex political world. So that's a perspective I think I bring to this conversation today. I've seen the hurt caused by the hateful acts around campus. And I know that during these times, it's hard to hear advice like we should turn the other cheek, or only love can defeat hate, or take the high road, or don't feed the trolls. I mean, these are all great advice, by the way, right? But I wish I had more satisfying advice to give. But I think it's not an impossible dream to think we can strike a better balance between liberty and inclusivity, right? So it's worth thinking about, and it's a long-term American project, right? There's not going to be any quick fix to any of this. So this is an important conversation because I see inclusivity as a great aspirational goal, which I fully support, and I think we're going to get there someday, right? But today, free speech is still a hard reality, and I think we have to work creatively and carefully within that constraint. So this means a lot of things. This also means staying focused on productive issues. This means not falling into a rigid all-or-nothing mindset that's going to make progress more difficult than it already is. So,
Thank you. Second question for all of you. In light of the recent incidents on campus, what message would you like to send to students of color and others alike moving forward?
I think the most important message that, I as a student of color myself and also like my peers, is that we're not alone in this fight, and that these aren't things that are happening in a vacuum, that there's precedent for dealing with things like this, for doing the work of unsettling the structures and things like that that allow for these things to happen and to go unchecked, and that there are people that are here to do that work for them, including ourselves.
Wonderful. Thank you, Leilani. Jose.
Yeah, I mean, my message for students of color is that, we hear you, we see you, we love you very much, and also this is your campus, this is your university. That's my message to you, okay? Because we're a public university. And let me just make this clear, I'll put it in economic terms. Because we're a public university, we're funded by the public, by the people of California. And California is a majority-minority state. Latinos are the largest population in California. We fund the university. The university belongs to you as much as it belongs to anybody else. You have every right to this university. This is part of the commons. This is your campus. You should never let any action, no matter how horrible it is, try to convince you otherwise. And I think that's part of what's going on here, is that these racist actions, these sort of attitudes, the microaggressions on an everyday basis are subtle signals to you that you do not belong. That's just a false message. It's untrue. You pay into the system, you pay into the university, whether you come here or not. This is your campus.
Thank you, Jose. Brian.
My message to students, specifically students of color, is be angry. Don't hold it in. Let it out, because we've been getting all of these messages throughout our socialization that you can't be angry, you can't speak out, especially if something happens to you. That's why I'm really proud of all the students who have been coming out and really sharing their stories and shedding light on a lot of the things that happen on an everyday basis, because even right now we're operating in crisis. We should have been operating in crisis every day for the past how many years Cal Poly has been in existence. It shouldn't just be this period of time. So be angry, lean into that anger, and really try to find a good way to get that anger out there, which is to speak out and to really create that change, because, as you said, Jose, it's your campus.
Thank you. Heidi.
I think the number one thing I would want the students to know is that, first of all, I feel very lost on this, and that I'm really looking forward to having the dialogue and figuring out exactly what to do, because I know I have a deep desire to be part of that, and then I'm never exactly clear what that looks like. So I'm grateful for that. And so to the students, I would say that I am here to stand in solidarity with them in an active, meaningful way, not just as a sentiment, but as a verb. Solidarity, I think, gets used a lot, and I think people sometimes forget the real action that needs to be behind that word. And mostly I'm here to listen and to believe, and to especially use my privilege as a white woman and as a leader in this community to lift up the voices of students of color and other marginalized students and community members.
Thank you. Stan.
So students of color, what you have had to endure is not a judgment of you or your worth, but a reflection of their fear and inhumanity. You will only lose if you begin to believe in what they say about you. And one way for you to get redemption is to get your Cal Poly degree, and I'm here to help you make that happen.
Thank you. Patrick.
I agree with all these sentiments. I would also add that I agree that you all have a right to be angry, right? We all do. We also need to be careful not to let that anger and hate consume us, right? So I think my message to people of color is, do not be afraid, right? Don't be afraid. I would compare this to some degree like news coverage about terrorism. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It certainly happens. As Brian points out, it happens every day, right? But it's easy to be overwhelmed and consumed by that bad news and think that this is a bigger threat to your daily existence than it might be. And if you go around feeling that way, it doesn't seem to be so sustainable, and it's going to close you off. It's going to close your heart to the empathy and community that is ultimately what's needed to solve a lot of these issues.
Thank you, Patrick. Third question, you all. Before we get to the audience questions, this is the last question that I have prepared for you. As we know, there have been issues on campus prior to the most recent events. What is in the ethos, from your opinion, of course, that makes some Cal Poly students feel as though demeaning their peers is going to go unchallenged?
I think that this institution is one out of many that, or one out of all of them really, that has been founded on white supremacist colonial structures. And so this institution is not an isolated institution. These events are not isolated situations. And the government, the country, the histories that have backed institutions like this operate on the same colonial structures. And so to expect that this wouldn't happen here, or that each incident is a shock, or that the feeling of being empowered to do these types of things is because they know that even if they don't act on hate speech, or they don't act on these things, that there are systems in place that will keep them out of punitive measures. I mean, thinking about police brutality. Police are able to kill black and brown bodies with impunity because there is systems in place that allow for them to go unchecked. That the histories of things like law enforcement come from slave patrols, come from white people lording power over black and brown bodies. And so if we think about the histories that go into an institution like this, an institution like the United States, an institution like any other piece of the colonial project, is it would be ahistorical and ultimately incorrect to think that people aren't backed by such large entities to do these things.
Thank you. Jose.
Yeah, in terms of the ethos, I think part of it is Cal Poly becomes emblematic of a kind of insularity. And this is why people feel like you can get away with this. That insularity, of course, is reflective of a history in this country of similar insularities, similar kind of demographics, similar kind of power structures. And I think this is what Leilani is saying as well. So that the reason people feel like they can do certain things, put yourself in blackface, is because of that same insularity. I'm sure if some of our fraternity members were in the middle of South Central, they probably would think twice about putting blackface on, right? And so it's that type of insularity. But that's a crude sort of comparison as well. What concerns me is more this question of the ethos. And let me just explain, when we talk about kind of this history of white supremacy and racism, it's not just these incidents of blackface or these sort of incidents that crop up that everyone can point to, even good sort of liberals, and go, oh, that's so terrible, that's so terrible. It's so pervasive and so insidious that it manifests itself in kind of different ways. Let me give you the best example. So when this question of blackface came up, I watched online as many, many parents reached out to the president and wrote to the president or wrote op-eds or wrote in. And many of these parents, good, loving parents, write as Cal Poly parents, and they write these letters, and all of their letters, their concern as a parent was for poor little Kyler Watkins. And this is the way this kind of everyday sort of racism seeps in. And it's a blindness, but it's also a type of cancer, right? It'll kill us from within. Because these parents go, well, it's a learning environment. It's a university. You should teach him. You should have a conversation with him. Or, oh, what about his future? His future is going to be damaged. His future is going to be ruined. None of those parents begin any of those notes, any of those letters with thinking about what black students would feel like on this campus. In light of that incident, they never say, hey, I wonder what black students are feeling on that campus. That they must feel horrible. Because your point of identification and your point of empathy is with someone who looks like you, someone who looks like your kid. And I get it, but that's still racist.
What he said. So I think what both the panelists have pointed out is that there is this history, this culture that even goes beyond Cal Poly. And when we even look at the demographics of Cal Poly, majority white. So there is a comfortability that's there. And with comfortability, we get a bit complacent. We let things slide, we let things pass. There is no form of punishment that really gets to, okay, this was wrong. And I think that's what we're seeing right now with the culture that we have at Cal Poly. And this is something that we will be really trying to navigate for a while and trying to dismantle for a while. But I really do think it's the complacency, because when we are complacent, a lot of people get hurt. I always use the example with my husband. So I get up for a glass of water. Do I ask him if he wants a glass? No, I'll just go get my water. But if I have a guest, would you like a glass of water? This is somebody new in my life who I'm like saying, okay, I have to make them feel comfortable, and we have to build that relationship. But I got complacent with my husband. And you know what? Sometimes he'll be like, okay, whatever, I'll get my glass. You'll want a glass of water soon. But for the most part, I think, what really stems from even the previous question that you asked was that sometimes the socialization that we have to not say anything, and especially, again, as people of color, I'm going to go back there, we don't say anything. I've gotten so many messages in my career from my parents that I can't be angry, I can't let it show. Smile and nod, and then try to craft a response that, would let the next person be comfortable. And I think that's where we are as a campus also.
Thank you.
So I am a Cal Poly graduate, but it's been a while since I've been on campus in that way as a student. And so I'd have to sort of wonder and not necessarily know what might make Cal Poly stand out or contribute to the culture here. And I wonder if the high level of affluence of the student body families seems like a contributing factor in how they behave and the culture that's created by that. And I think too, and I wonder, again, I'm wondering, not knowing, if just the nature of a Polytechnic campus itself has a driver that is very, very career sort of bottom line driven, as opposed to having a more breadth and depth into the fullness of what it is to be fully human. And I think those two things together suggest that the sort of economic capitalist drivers that are going on there have not created an environment in their home life potentially, and then therefore it spills over onto campus, that really demand that we ask ourselves, how am I going to show up in this human experience? And I think that there seems to be a fairly widespread fundamental challenge and lack of empathy on the part of the students here at Cal Poly, and I think maybe all those things are kind of hand in hand.
Thank you, Heidi.
So first, let me comment on Brian's comment. So what I do with for my wife is that I just get the glass of water and let her decide if she's going to drink it or not. Avoids the dilemma. Okay. So, but more seriously, I really want to appreciate I appreciate the perspectives that the other panelists have mentioned here, and I think what I just want to add is that the way I think about what they've said is the norms, that we have in our daily lives are at a point where people feel like it's okay to either do these things or to let it slide, and so people aren't stepping up. You know, people are sitting on the sidelines. So I guess what I'll say is that it's time to get off the sidelines and get in the game and do something about it because it's tearing us apart.
Absolutely. Thank you. Patrick.
So the question is, I think, what's going on here in the climate that's emboldening some people to say such hateful things without fear of repercussion? I would agree that a lack of diversity is a big contributing factor. Complacency is also another big contributing factor, right? For many of the last recent years, things were looking better, right? It seems like we're making progress along a lot of different lines, and it's easy to think that progress is just going to happen by itself, and that we let our guards down and we don't speak up, right? So I think all that, I agree, is part of the problem. But also, I've been around campuses from coast to coast, right, from north to south. I don't think that San Luis Obispo or Cal Poly has any special sickness that other campuses don't have, right? So I'm seeing Cal Poly is just really a microcosm of, I think, a larger national problem, right, of rising nationalism and racists being coming out of the shadows and out from under their rocks, and they're increasingly becoming more bold. So I see this as a national problem. This isn't just a Cal Poly only or San Luis Obispo problem, and there's no easy fix. I think a lot of this comes down to, I think, our core basic values. We've already enshrined and entrenched liberty as a fundamental core value. I mean, America's commitment to liberty is unique. Some might say that we're overcommitted to it. I mean, we let people do all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And say things they want, do things they want, as long as it doesn't hurt others. And even if it does hurt others, we might let you do that still, right? So philosophically, I think there's this is a very old problem. You could trace it back to our original commitments to core values, which can collide, which can conflict with other values, right? So liberty conflicts with security. Liberty also can conflict with inclusivity. And we're going to have to make some really hard decisions about the direction of our nation. I mean, this is really about the soul of our nation. And I think we got to do it thoughtfully and have some realism, but also idealism in that project.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you all for answering those questions. And thank you all for the questions that have come from the audience. And at this point, I'm going to, I'm sorry, you have something, Leilani? By all means.
Yeah, I just wanted to make note of the fact that I think when we talk about liberty, like liberty conflicts with slavery and the exclusion of people of color, of women, of all sorts of marginalized people. And so I think that we should be careful about talking about liberty without also discussing the ways that this country was founded on liberty and justice for all, but how that liberty was never justice for anyone, really, except for white, male, etc.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Are we ready? You all? Okay. So the way that this works, and I'll remind you all, I won't go down the line. I'll just have you all asked to be acknowledged, and we'll go from there, whatever resonates. So what steps can we individuals in the Cal Poly community do to make the students, staff, faculty, and guests feel safe and welcome on our campus? Whomever wants to take that on first.
Okay. I'm answering this because I'll answer what I'm trying to do, and I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, but you said what individuals can do?
Yes, the person says, what steps can we individuals in the Cal Poly community do to make the students, staff, faculty, and guests feel safe and welcome on our campus?
Okay. So number one, at least for me, what I'm trying to do is, number one, educate myself and really listen to both, the spoken word, but also do the reading from those who have expressed, I think, pretty clearly what that might look like. So I feel, like I said, a strong desire, but don't feel like I yet have the answer of what that actually looks like. So for me personally, I'm really trying to actively seek out, my own education on that. And I think what I'm trying to do, you called it the unlearning, and often I've heard people say, which resonates, I want to decolonize my own mind and decolonize my own heart. And I think what I'm hopeful for is that I can, in tandem, take meaningful action. So also being mindful that I don't want to spend, years studying this without taking action. So,
thank you very much. Anyone else on the panel want to take that one on?
I
Leilani.
think that what the individual can do is to really consider so there's this a TED Talk put on by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie about the single story, and I think that what she talks about is that you have to lead with the first thing rather than the second thing, and so rather than saying, for instance, black men are lazy and they're more likely to be criminals, and that's why they're always in jail, and that there's single homes and things like that, to really understand what the historical context of that is, what the root of that is that slavery took a lot of the able-bodied men, the able-bodied women, etc., from them, so that structure then followed across everything. And so that is like the larger picture of why things are the way that they are. And so I think that it's important for the individual to really question what's behind everything, really, to question what the truth is and who's telling that truth and who it's meant to be for and how it's meant to function and things like that. And I think that we can look at the ways that things like the Constitution are held up to be this untouchable document, but that the ways that language has been interpreted, the ways that was written, who wrote it, what it has functioned to do, and to really bring into question what people say, because everyone has, as you said, from birth been told certain things about certain people, about certain contexts, about everything, really. And so it's important for the individual to question that and to then pass that on, because if you do it for yourself and decolonize your mind and that's it, you didn't help anyone. You didn't do anything, really. And so it's important to pass that on and to build those coalitions and to really actively do that work of unsettling everything, and to not only decolonize your mind, but to decolonize the minds of the entire planet, really.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah,
Jose.
I agree. I think that we're outlining a kind of two-step process. One, we need to think about the way in which we think and our ideas about people and structures and everything, and then based on those things, take action. And so the way I explain this to students in my classroom is for example, when we talk about privilege in all forms, I tell them, yes, there's white privilege, and then of course people they feel guilty, and I tell them, don't feel guilty, just understand what it is and then take action. That's what's required of us. And there are multiple points of privilege, I tell them as well. This relates to the thinking part, right? The point of privilege is that you don't have to think about certain things. I tell them, even me, as a man of color, a dark-skinned Latino, I'm straight. And so my sexuality offers me a point of privilege. So let me explain. When I wake up in the morning, I don't have to think about my sexuality. when I'm out at Starbucks, in the Starbucks line, and I'm out with my partner, if we're holding hands, if I give her a kiss in public, I never have to worry whether someone would then look at me and say something nasty to me and say something, ew, that's disgusting, why don't you keep that in your house or keep that in private. I never ever have to think while I'm walking down the street if some boys in a truck, because usually it's boys in a truck who might be overcompensating, are gonna drive by me and then not be able to see if I'm a boy or a girl or a man or a woman, and then decide to chase me down through a park and try to pull my pants down to figure out for their own self or their own pleasure whether I'm a boy or a girl. I never have to think about that. I never have to worry about it. In my daily life, those fears, those concerns never cross my mind unless I make them cross my mind. That's the point of privilege. And we have many forms of them based on class. Oh, no worries, I can just buy this. I don't have that, no worries, I can just buy that. Based on sexuality, that's my point of privilege. And some of us have it based on race. These structures are complex and dynamic. They're so complex and dynamic that they seep into our minds in this kind of way. It's all of our jobs to stay vigilant so that we never become complicit with treating other people in terrible ways based on these privileges, based on these things. It's a good ethic, that's it. It's compassion. It's caring about the person next to you, whether they're trans or queer or black or brown or a woman or whatever. So that if you're in that Starbucks line and that boy who just got out of the big truck comes in there and tries to say something like that, you need to intervene. Good ethics require that. Good human decency requires that.
Thank you. We'll take one more and then we'll ask another question. Ryan, did you want
So, I'm gonna do, so if you have ever been in my trainings, you probably will get this. And even if you haven't been, you probably will get this. So when I say something, you can answer, what color is the sun? Yellow? Peanut butter? Peanut butter? Oh, come on. Okay, so not the color, but peanut butter and? How quick were those things? Those things happen so quickly that we don't even think about it. And so, I lead with that because that's how easy it is to actually, for your bias to actually come up. And that's how easy it is to actually commit a microaggression. And if we're having fun, or if we're angry, that's how easy it is to be violent. So all of these things tie into each other very quickly, very seamlessly. So there is some redesigning, rethinking that has to happen. And Pat, to even get to what you were speaking about, a microcosm, yes, we're a microcosm, but there's also a lot of redesigning that we can do for some things to not happen on this campus. First off, we could actually start enacting our values because those things should come very quickly to us. We learn those things even in the week of welcome. I didn't go through the week of welcome, but I learned about the values really quick during my first week here. So I know all of us know these values, and if we have to actually enact these values and live by these values, we can actually hold people accountable for those values. And I think that's some of the things that really have to happen. And even when we're talking about liberty, let's redefine liberty and liberty for all. Let's redefine that. Because who really defined liberty? And I think that's where we're trying to head, but we actually have to commit to it. So there's an education piece that needs to happen, and usually, if you're saying, oh, I'm good with diversity and inclusion, I don't need to go to that training, okay, you need to go to that training. And we're always talking about this, oh my goodness, I'm so tired about this. Why are you tired? I'm tired. So I really want to put that out there because I really think it is important. And the other piece is to be curious about other people. Try to learn something new about them. And stop just acting on what you think you know. Be curious and find that out. And also be curious of yourself and ask yourself, how do I know what I know? So curiosity is a big piece.
Thank you. Okay, there are some really good questions, and so I'm going to skip about a bit. What can Cal Poly do given Prop 209 constraints? Alrighty, go for it. Yes.
All right, so
Stan?
I think what Cal Poly can do is enact the Cal Poly Opportunities Grant, because that's a way to get funding to students who need the money to come here. So
Okay.
as simple as that.
Jose?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Stan. You know, the Cal Poly's Opportunity Grant is an opportunity to do something, to take material action. And I know it's rather unpopular with some students and some faculty, but as I said before, we're a California-funded university system. That means if you're a California student, you already pay into the system. In fact, because we're Californians, the California Master Plan, and because of who we are and how wonderful we are, we fight to make sure that our university system, our CSU system, is affordable. So we keep tuition low, and we fight the government to keep tuition low when they want to increase tuition. And then we add our taxes to the system so that we can continue to keep it low and hold them accountable. If you're an out-of-state student, you and your family never pay into the system. You don't pay taxes into the system. And so what you benefit from if you're an out-of-state student is a subsidized education, a quality subsidized education at Cal Poly that is funded by you, the taxpayer, the California taxpayer. So you put into the system students out of state, while their university, public university systems, by the way, are charging them more and more money, see our system, they see Cal Poly, and it comes at an incredible discount. You're subsidizing their education. This is a way to help them pay into a system that you're paying into already, and also help students of color, low-income students, and this is even the poor kid from Baco, the poor white kid from Baco, who needs that opportunity, the rural kid who needs that opportunity. This is a way to have everyone pay their fair share and do something good. So I can't endorse that opportunity grant more than that. It just makes great economic sense.
Thank you. Jose. Okay, here we go. This is a faculty question. I felt on my own when I spoke with my students about the events. They said not many faculty allowed time for their choices. How can we empower more discussion?
I think one way to start is to have that discussion in the first place. I think that a lot of the ways in which whiteness functions, the ways that other privileges function, is that they're invisible. They're not talked about. They're not acknowledged. History is erased. We're not taught things in class and things like that. And I think that it's important for us to begin that conversation, and even further than that, that when we do begin those conversations, that we really privilege the voices that are marginalized, and that we privilege the people that have been doing that work, of doing that educating, to really say what that should look like and what, like, discussions about solutions by, for, and about these people can look like.
Wonderful. Thank you. Anyone else want to take that one? Brian?
So that's I think on its head, or face value, it seems like a simple question, but that's actually really complex. So we have faculty who are not, they don't have the tools to actually engage in these conversations. And I think a huge part of that is actually, in some ways, and it'll be a little unpopular, mandating faculty to go through some trainings and also find ways of implementing inclusive pedagogy in the classrooms, using the actual lived experiences, especially of underrepresented students, in the curriculum to inform knowledge that's being created. That I think is a part of it. And definitely a part of it is actually having that conversation. But it really is also on students too. And if we're not willing to actually push for diversifying our student population, then there is actually, in some ways, no need for these faculty members to get the tools that they need to engage and also stop behaviors that's problematic in the classroom.
Okay, thank you. We have another. In regard to Greek life, what do you believe the next steps moving forward are, as well as the effects of possible Black chapters on campus?
You know, as far as the effects, I think that's going to be determined by Greek life. It's going to be determined by students in Greek life. Right? If you continue these behaviors, there will continue to be consequences. You know, you'll continue a certain image that Greek life has as very white. And so, I mean, one solution is not just diversify the university as a whole or diversify the faculty, but diversify Greek life, right? I mean, reach out to folks. And I understand there are all the excuses. Well, we try to offer, you know, bids and folks to students of color, but they won't come. It's chicken and egg, right? They won't come because they don't feel safe. And you have to deal with that first. And that's one sort of integrationist model, if you will. But I still, I don't know, as a faculty member, I think pedagogically and in terms of the university, I don't know what function Greek life sort of does for us. What does it do for us as a university? So I think that's a fundamental question. I know what it does post-university. It allows you to create social networks. Then in your social networks, you might get a job because you were part of the same fraternity, which means you don't believe in a real meritocracy because you didn't get that job because you're the best qualified. You get the job because you were a frat brother or a sorority sister. I know the contradictions are just all over the place, right? We say we're a meritocracy in America, but then these sort of contradictions emerge. So those are fundamental questions, and they're two opposite questions. One solution is to integrate Greek life. The other is to do away with it altogether. I don't know.
Thank you. Anyone else on that one before we move on? Okay. For a white male, what is the benefit of inclusivity?
I mean, I think at a base level, the benefits of inclusivity are that you will restore your own humanity by no longer denying the humanity of other people.
Oh.
I cannot wait to see who you become, Leilani. My God.
Let me just, I mean, I think this is a fundamental question, right? I think the question of racism and inclusion and integration and all these, you know, they're fundamental questions. They're ethical questions. They're about our soul. They're about our humanity. Those are all abstract. Let me just make it concrete for you all, okay? There's large-scale demographic shifts going on in the country, and I think that's one of the reasons for the backlashes that we're seeing. But in California, we lead the way. We're incredibly particular. So Cal Poly is in many ways, as a university, similar to other national universities, but not similar to other California state universities in the state. The other ones are incredibly diverse, and it's not just that we're a Polytechnic campus, because Pomona, Cal Poly Pomona, Polytechnic, they're incredibly diverse. So there are black scientists, Latino scientists, invested in STEM. I mean, they're out there. Cal Poly Pomona proves it, right? But in terms of, as a white man, as white folks, how does inclusion benefit you? Let me make this clear to you. In California public schools right now, in kindergarten, 50% of kindergartners are Latino. 75% almost of all students in California public schools are non-white. They are the base of California. They're a massive population in California, and they're only growing. I know it sounds scary, right? They're only growing, okay? When you think about the way states run, We're a state university. You think about our funding, you think about your roads, you think about everything in the state. If that is your massive base and you abandon them, that is, they never get to college because they're not our children, or they live in another part of town, or because in a subtle way you're invested in the supremacy and goodness of your own kids, and you think your kids deserve a job and not those folks. If you abandon that massive base, you're going to create a division between the rich and the poor. But more importantly, here's how it affects you. They never get to college. If they never get to college, they never get a good paying job. If they don't get a good paying job, you can't tax them. That's right. Imagine how massive this base is. If you can't tax that base, they're never going to contribute to the state coffers. So you're going to bankrupt your state. Or you're going to force a small elite of wealthy rich folks to foot the bill. They're not going to be able to do it forever. That's going to be a strain that's not sustainable. So if you invest in that base, they make it to college, they get good jobs, you tax them, we become wealthier as a state, you get better roads, you get better funding for the university. I like that. Yeah, you get all of that. And there's also economic implications. Because if that massive base of Californians never make good money, they then can't qualify for good credit to buy your houses. So that aging white population, you want to retire, you want to sell your house on the market at the highest possible price, if there isn't competition there, if there isn't a base there with money, with good credit, that can drive the cost of your house up, your house is going to sit on the market, it's going to lose money, lots and lots of money. And then, back in the same situation. You need to invest in those kids, invest in that future. Investing in them is ultimately investing in yourself. So if you're a white person and you're a white male, you need to know it's in your interest. It's good for all of us. The rising tide will lift all our boats.
Yeah,
Yes. Stan, by all means.
I really like, so those are two amazing replies. I just want to add on that there's just also baked into this sense of that society is like a pie, and if someone else gets more, then I get less. And that's not the case here, is that we're all in it together, and there's plenty for everyone, and if we are all moving forward together and learning from each other, that enriches all of us. So besides the economic argument, so I'm just adding on, there's also this other thing that it's just, we don't have to have this zero-sum mindset about it as well.
Awesome. Thank you. So I have a specific question for a specific panelist. Mayor Harmon, what are you doing to help lift women of color to become political leaders?
What am I going to do?
What it reads, what are you doing to help lift up women of color to become political leaders?
Okay. So part of the challenge of this question, this answer, is that we lack so much diversity in this community. So I can say I have done a lot to try and lift up women in general, and especially encourage women to run for office and take up more space and share their voice. And I am committed to being part of the solutions to this issue and doing exactly that. So I attended the event that the students of color primarily put on a couple weeks ago at the park, and just went there just to listen. And so really tried to hear firsthand from those students, what is your experience and what can I do? And so that is something, as I've said, that I am struggling with exactly what that is. And so that's not to evade the question, but here's the other piece. So we don't want to wait. We want to do this with speed. And what I've noticed is if I move ahead, especially on this issue, with good intentions but not enough education, I go in the wrong direction. And so I have reached out to students. I feel like I have a good relationship with students in general. I try and show up for primarily the students that are marginalized here on campus and in our community, and I would absolutely be open and willing to support women of color in particular coming up to intern or to have a nexus at the city or any of the work that I'm doing.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Next question. What can student bystanders do to discourage these incidents and make students of color feel safer here?
Speak up, point it out, name it. So if you can't name it, get the education, go to a training. But most of all, never tell someone who comes to you, or never ask the question, are you sure? That's a really rough question to get when you're pouring your heart out, sharing your experience with someone, and somebody asks you, are you sure that happened to you? So those are just the two things I will put in.
I think
Thank you.
maybe like a productive thing to do is to make it so that it's not that it feels the way that students of color are made to feel when these things happen, that same feeling of being outside of that group or outside of that space, that is how people who do these things feel, that they do not feel emboldened, that they feel that, oh, I'm going to actually face backlash for these things, that I do not have the space and I do not have the power to do these things without consequences.
Next question. How do we reach out to spaces such as fraternities where people aren't necessarily already willing to engage in the conversation?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. How do we reach out to spaces such as fraternities where people aren't necessarily already willing to engage in the conversation? In other words, how do we reach the people who are not the choir? When we're singing to the choir, we know where they are. How do we reach people who are not necessarily in that sector? Particularly fraternities, as it relates to this question. Patrick?
I don't know. I think that, that's a very difficult question. I wonder, I think my impulse is to say you can really only truly reach out to someone who is reachable. So if they remain unreachable, then there's very little you can do. But we must attempt, right? We must make the attempt.
Yes. Okay.
So
Stan.
I can come at this in a little bit different way. So the Mustangs United movement, love, empathy, and respect. So some of us are wearing our stickers. So what we're trying to do is set campus norms. And if a vast majority of people, right, believe in these norms, these, being kind and, decent, then that, I think, changes the landscape. And then that could be a way to start to draw people in who might take longer to come around.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So I think where I want to go with that question, I don't know if that's the answer, but I'm just gonna say what I'm thinking. We have certain values, and unless we bring in students with those values, we will continuously have this issue. And if we're having a conversation of how do we reach these students, well, that means these students shouldn't be here. And we have to come to terms with that as a community. We have to be able to say, these are our values. If you respect these values, if you want to enact these values, this is the place for you. If you don't believe in these values, why are you here?
Some people want the student who did blackface to be expelled. Is there room for forgiveness? Are there other remedies for people?
I think that there can be room for forgiveness when things like this happen, but there are a lot of other things that really go into that. I think that you have to consider that there is willful ignorance behind doing something like blackface, that we are in 2018, that we go to the school that we go to, that we have the educational requirements that in theory are supposed to discourage us from doing things like that, and that still that happened, and that still it happened again. And so I think that, like Brian was saying, like, we should really problematize what people's investments are to come here and still say that they didn't know, or say that that their actions are happening in a vacuum. And so I think that while, yes, we can forgive when people recognize their privileges, recognize their wrongdoing, I think that also when is enough? When is saying, oh yes, you said sorry, so I'll forgive you? When does that end? When does zero tolerance become the norm in a place like the United States or like Cal Poly, where they're founded on structures that are supposed to allow them to just always get the, oh yeah, it's fine, go ahead, it's fine. And so I think that we can talk about forgiveness, but if that doesn't also come with other punitive measures, that saying, oh, I'm sorry, will not just let it happen and let it go scot-free, that there needs to be, that forgiveness is not exempt from punishment in other ways.
Okay, thank you. Patrick.
So I've been hearing these calls or suggestions that we expel students for their hateful acts, and I worry about that. So I mean, this is a perfect example, I think, of a direction where we need to be careful and creative. So look, I'm not a lawyer, right? I teach philosophy of law. I work with lawyers. I have an appointment at a law school, but I'm pretty sure that given how the First Amendment is, given how free speech laws are, that it's really not an option for a public university to expel someone for non-criminal hate speech. So this isn't just a legal point. I think it's counterproductive, right? So not only I think would administrators and other folks not take this seriously, I think it makes our collective efforts in diversity and inclusivity look unreasonable. So when other folks endorse or support calls to expel a student, that lends credibility to those demands, right? So that makes them sound more reasonable than they might be. And I'm afraid that kind of anchors or nails into place an impossible bar to clear. Right, and that's going to make progress that much harder. That's going to turn, legitimate frustration and positive energy into, someplace darker and less productive. So I think, forgiveness is one option, if that's your bag. But I think we can be creative and more thoughtful about some of these responses. I think some of these suggestions are just so divisive that we might all be on the same side, but if we're proposing something that's on its face just looks completely illegal, or if it requires that we reimagine the Constitution in American society, which, by the way, is a very interesting thought experiment, right? And a philosopher, I would be all for that. But I think to solve urgent practical problems today, we need to go beyond thought experiments and look for more immediate, realistic solutions. So to answer your question, how would you engage a fraternity, for instance, in these conversations? First, backing up, I think it might be, we need to be careful not to paint all fraternities, Greek life, in the same broad stroke, right? So I think that's pretty obvious. But I think the real solution is in empathy, love, community building. And these are hard things to do. As you pointed out, you have to put your ego aside, right? You have to be brave. You have to be courageous. So I don't think there's any rule or training requirement we could force onto an organization, right, or any group of folks who are at liberty to assemble as they're like, I don't think a perfect set of rules is what makes a society. A good society is run on community and empathy, and that takes hard work. So I'm reminded of these, you know, if someone invites a gratuitously offensive speaker to campus, I like that you know, President Armstrong and Mayor Harmon have organized in support of these alternative events, right? As thirst quenching as it might be to expel somebody, that I think there are just more creative and more productive ways we can go. And these community events are what I think gets us out of our spaces and echo chambers, and you start to learn, and you're curious about other people, you get to know them. I grew up in the South. I know some hardcore racists. You know, I've seen my fair share of hateful stuff, but I've also seen, you know, hateful racist people melt. You know, they can change as they get to know other people. So to answer that question, maybe one way to go is you put something like a fraternity or some other group in proximity, in connection. You put them together with another group, and you share a table, you share a meal with them, right? I mean, as Mayor Harmon, I think, has said, you know, we don't build higher walls, build bigger tables, right? So sit down and get to know each other. This is the same problem I have in my work. So my work is pretty interdisciplinary. I do technology ethics. And a lot of folks ask me, well, how do you get engineers, technologists to talk with philosophers and history folks and literature folks? I think it starts simply. It starts with the hard work of getting to know someone, sharing a meal, sharing a drink. So that might be one of many ways you can go. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can regulate community, right? You have to, it takes work and it has to grow organically.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I respectfully disagree. The notion that somehow, because something may or may not be illegal, like regulating free speech, the legal framework and the notion of a legal framework, if that's your framework to approaching issues of race, you've ignored hundreds of years of history, okay? If you want to talk about what's legal, often what is legal is a construct of power, and it's a construct of the powerful who are making the laws. If you're a woman in America, you know this intimately, right? These are abortion laws. You look at Congress and you look at who's making the laws. So the legal framework as a premise for what is reasonable or unreasonable has historically been tone deaf with regard to the history of racism in America. Because it was not very long ago that it was illegal for interracial marriage in Virginia. Okay? So using a legal framework of what is legal and what is not is already a fallacy. And if we even want to, we can go back to Aquinas. An unjust law, he says, is no law at all. There is civil disobedience. There is room for civil disobedience. And again, we must remember that what is legal is often, though not always, a construct and a reflection of constructs of power. It is people with power making those rules and those laws. And often they're unjust. So the legal framework and then attaching a notion or a judgment of reasonability and credibility to students who are making a request or demand to expel someone from a community, you have to entertain it. You have to know, and you cannot hide under the construct of, well, this is legal. Again, if we hid behind that, there would be no progress in America with regard to race and inclusion. Many people's marriages to this day, Brian's marriage would be illegal if we just gave up and threw up our hands and said, well, that's illegal. I'm sorry, we must resist. We cannot let those things alone. And whether we win or not, there's a 5-4 split in the Supreme Court. Whether we win or not is a different thing. But it's an ethical responsibility that we all have to try to do what is right. So sometimes what is legal is not always what is right or just. We have to commit to what is right and just, even if it is illegal.
To quickly respond to Jose, so I agree with much of that. I know that unjust laws exist, and it's up to us to challenge unjust laws. From here, I don't know that liberty is one of those unjust values or laws. I mean, yes, certainly it's been unequally given, unequally applied, but you know, as a principle, theoretically, it looks pretty agnostic to race, gender, and all that stuff. So I would say, I would also be careful not to paint legal regimes with a broad brush, that just because the Constitution was created by, a bunch of, old white men without consultation other groups, doesn't automatically invalidate all of that stuff. So I think that's the tricky part, right? I mean, I appreciate that idealism, but I think we also need to be guided with some realism because the risks are real. So let's say we were to expel a student, hit with a lawsuit, which inevitably would go up to the Supreme Court, right? You're looking at potentially a downside of tens of millions of dollars, money that would come out of student groups and other activities that could be funded. And in the meantime, if we expelled other students thinking that, Cal Poly is going to be the test case where we reinvent free speech laws, that, again, very interesting thought experiment, but I don't know it's up to any of us to take that kind of risk for an entire university. I mean, you made an economic argument earlier that money matters and we got to raise revenue, and a university is a business. It needs to run on money. And I think it's a very risky strategy to not impossible, not unworthy, but a highly risky strategy to challenge what the legal consensus is. Here's how free speech works. There's a real downside. It's not just a matter of principle. I mean, it's a matter of some groups might go out of existence because we don't have campus funding for that. I mean, that might be a risk that you're willing to take, right? But is that a risk that an administrator should take for all of the campus?
So Pat, you'll excuse me, but it sounds like you're saying that racism is too expensive to fight. And that we should be concerned about the budget instead of concerned about fighting racism. Right, and I get it, I'm oversimplifying here. I understand you're arguing for a defense of liberty and these kinds of values. And again, you're referring to the framework of the law. But if you read carefully, let me just illustrate. The 13th Amendment of the Constitution, by popular sort of understanding of it, abolishes slavery. But if you read very carefully, it doesn't abolish slavery everywhere. The 13th Amendment, and here's just to illustrate my point, abolishes slavery everywhere except as a punishment for a crime. So it abolishes slavery everywhere except the prison system. Now imagine people who might connect slavery and plantations with who ends up in prison or the prison system. Now I'm not saying this is some sort of conspiracy or whatever. I am saying they're connected. And if you fall into that logic that the law is neutral, and it is not, you also then support these same systems. I don't disagree with you that it might be costly. I'm not sure that we're ready for that fight yet. But here's an interesting constitutional question that gets raised by these incidents of blackface and racism. The First Amendment, stare decisis, is not an absolute right. It's limited. The minute your speech crosses the line and becomes harassment, and it doesn't even have to be targeted harassment. Let me give you an example. If in the department office, I start making a bunch of sex jokes, and they're not directed at a woman or anyone in particular, and someone feels harassed, they can still say something. If I continue that behavior, then it's no longer free speech, it's harassment. That is the legal question there. And the question of harassment then raises the other, amendment, like the 14th Amendment. We talked about the 13th, now the 14th. That one has an equal protection clause in it. Now this becomes a constitutional question. Does an individual have a greater right to the First Amendment, or do groups of people have greater rights under the 14th Amendment to be free from targeted harassment in those kinds of ways? I don't know. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I think it's an interesting question. I also don't think racism is too expensive to fight.
And we're getting close to the end, you all. And I think that, Brian, let's let you have the last word then.
So I just wanted to actually, if we're really doing real and raw talk.
Well, it's real and raw to me.
So,
yeah, go for it.
So from an administrative perspective, in terms of a consequence and in terms of and in terms of what you even propose of bringing people to the table and love, empathy, respect, those things have to be genuine and authentic. And too many times on this campus, on many campuses, we try to put the onus on people of color to do the education. And when we bring, let's say, some traditional white fraternities to the table with students of color, the experience becomes tokenized. And that's something that we have to actually put a stop to. When is it the responsibility of the privilege to do the work? Because, like you, Kimberly, one day I want to retire. I want to be done from this work. Because although I love this work and it feeds my soul, it's also tiring. And I would love to see some of my privileged colleagues doing some of the work that needs to be done.
Thank you. Okay, this really is it.
Real quick, so,
Go for it, Stan.
right, so just gonna add on to Brian's point. Like, I have white male colleagues, since we're going real and raw,
Yes.
who say it's not my job to do this because I teach math or I teach chemistry, right? And so I don't have to do this work. And what I'm gonna say is, no, it's all our responsibility to do this work because we teach students.
Yes.
Hey, Kimberly. And one more thing,
Okay.
the consequence that I
Okay.
had to bring up. So Greek life, you're in the house? Woo! Okay. So as we're thinking of a consequence and really giving back to the institution, you do a lot of philanthropy, a lot of fundraising. That money could really go into diversity and inclusion and really correcting some of the things that are happening at the institution. So that was my consequence. I just wanted to put that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Sorry.
Thank you, Leilani, Jose, Brian, Heidi, Stan, and Patrick. Thank you. Thank all of you for coming and listening and hearing and engaging. And this is just the beginning of what I hope to be a tremendous amount of ongoing change, because I've had conversations with your administration, and I am not yet part of the fabric of this environment, but as a consultant, I hope to become closer. But I will tell you that they're invested. And I came to see that too. I didn't just come, it's real and raw, right? I didn't just come to get paid. And I didn't just come to do my thing. I came to see what's really, really happening here. And I cannot invest where I don't see people on the other side of it pouring in. And I've seen investment from Dr. Armstrong. I've seen investment from Josie. I've seen investment from your administration, top down. And you know, sometimes things like the things that have been happening on your campus begin and change and motivate people to do things very differently, because one of the things on the campus that I work on and I believe is something that thwarts change is we've always done it this way. And it's time to do it differently, and I feel it in the room. I feel it on the campus, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you all so much.